rushed forward, and after a long and fierce struggle succeeded in rescuing it from desecration. Death of Hector. And now came the mournful task of informing Achilles of the fate of his friend. He wept bitterly over the dead body of his comrade, and solemnly vowed that the funeral rites should not be solemnized in his honor until he had slain Hector with his own hands and captured 12 Trojans to be immolated on his funeral pyre. All other considerations vanished before the burning desire to avenge the death of his friend, and Achilles, now thoroughly aroused from his apathy, became reconciled to Agamemnon, and rejoined the Greek army. At the request of the goddess Thetis, Hephaestus forged for him a new suit of armour, which far surpassed in magnificence that of all the other heroes. Thus gloriously arrayed, he was soon seen striding along, calling the Greeks to arms. He now led the troops against the enemy, who were defeated and put to flight, until, near the gates of the city, Achilles and Hector encountered each other. But here, for the first time throughout his whole career, the courage of the Trojan hero deserted him. At the near approach of his redoubtable antagonist, he turned and fled for his life. Achilles pursued him, and thrice round the walls of the city was the terrible race run, in sight of the old king and queen, who had mounted the walls to watch the battle. Hector endeavoured, during each course, to reach the city gates, so that his comrades might open them to admit him, or cover him with their missiles. But his adversary, seeing his design, forced him into the open plain, at the same time calling to his friends to hurl no spear upon his foe, but to leave to him the vengeance he had so long panted for. At length, wearied with the hot pursuit, Hector made a stand and challenged his foe to single combat. A desperate encounter took place, in which Hector succumbed to his powerful adversary at the Scaean gate, and with his last dying breath the Trojan hero foretold to his conqueror that he himself would soon perish on the same spot. The infuriated victor bound the lifeless corpse of his fallen foe to his chariot, and dragged it 3 times round the city walls, and thence to the Greek camp. Overwhelmed with horror at this terrible scene, the aged parents of Hector uttered such heart-rending cries of anguish that they reached the ears of Andromache, his faithful wife, who, rushing to the walls, beheld the dead body of her husband bound to the conqueror's car. Achilles now solemnized the funeral rites in honor of his friend Patroclus. The dead body of the hero was borne to the funeral pile by the Myrmidons in full panoply. His dogs and horses were then slain to accompany him, in case he should need them in the realm of shades, after which Achilles, in fulfilment of his savage vow, slaughtered 12 brave Trojan captives, who were laid on the funeral pyre, which was now lighted. When all was consumed, the bones of Patroclus were carefully collected and enclosed in the golden urn. Then followed the funereal games, which consisted of chariot races, fighting with the cestus, a sort of boxing glove, wrestling matches, foot races, and single combats with shield and spear, in all of which the most distinguished heroes took part, and contended for the prizes. Penthesilea. After the death of Hector, their great hope and bulwark, the Trojans did not venture beyond the walls of their city. But soon their hopes were revived by the appearance of a powerful army of Amazons, under the command of their queen Penthesilea, a daughter of Ares, whose great ambition was to measure swords with the renowned Achilles himself, and to avenge the death of the valiant Hector. Hostilities now recommenced in the open plain. Penthesilea led the Trojan host, the Greeks on their side being under the command of Achilles and Ajax. Whilst the latter succeeded in putting the enemy to flight, Achilles was challenged by Penthesilea to single combat. With heroic courage she went forth to the fight, but even the strongest men failed before the power of the great Achilles, and though a daughter of Ares, Penthesilea was but a woman. With generous chivalry the hero endeavoured to spare the brave and beautiful maiden warrior, and only when his own life was in imminent danger did he make a serious effort to vanquish his enemy, when Penthesilea shared the fate of all who ventured to oppose the spear of Achilles, and fell by his hand. Feeling herself fatally wounded, She remembered the desecration of the dead body of Hector, and earnestly entreated the forbearance of the hero. But the petition was hardly necessary, for Achilles, full of compassion for his brave but unfortunate adversary, lifted her gently from the ground, and she expired in his arms. On beholding the dead body of their leader in the possession of Achilles, the Amazons and Trojans prepared for a fresh attack, in order to wrest it from his hands. But observing their purpose, Achilles stepped forward and loudly called upon them to halt. Then, in a few well-chosen words, he praised the great valour and intrepidity of the fallen queen, and expressed his willingness to resign the body at once. The chivalrous conduct of Achilles was fully appreciated by both Greeks and Trojans. Thersites alone, a base and cowardly wretch, attributed unworthy motives to the gracious proceedings of the hero, and, not content with these insinuations, he savagely pierced with his lance the dead body of the Amazonian queen, whereupon Achilles, with one blow of his powerful arm, felled him to the ground, and killed him on the spot. The well-merited death of Thersites excited no commiseration, but his kinsman Diomedes came forward and claimed compensation for the murder of his relative, and as Agamemnon, who, as commander-in-chief, might easily have settled the difficulty, refrained from interfering. The proud nature of Achilles resented the implied condemnation of his conduct, and he once more abandoned the Greek army and took ship for Lesbos. Odysseus, however, followed him to the island, and, with his usual tact, succeeded in inducing the hero to return to the camp. Death of Achilles. A new ally of the Trojans now appeared on the field in the person of Memnon, the Ethiopian, a son of Eos and Tithonus, who brought with him a powerful reinforcement of negroes. Memnon was the first opponent who had yet encountered Achilles on an equal footing, for like the great hero himself, he was the son of a goddess, and possessed also, like Achilles, a suit of armour made for him by Hephaestus. Before the heroes encountered each other in single combat, the two goddesses, Thetis and Eos, hastened to Olympus to intercede with its mighty ruler for the life of their sons. Resolved even in this instance not to act in opposition to the Moirae, Zeus seized the golden scales in which he weighed the lot of mortals, and placed it in the respective fates of the two heroes, whereupon that of Memnon weighed down the balance, thus portending his death. Eos abandoned Olympus in despair. Arrived on the battlefield, she beheld the lifeless body of her son, who, after a long and brave defence, had at length succumbed to the all-conquering arm of Achilles. At her command her children, the winds, flew down to the plain, and seizing the body of the slain hero, conveyed it through the air safe from the desecration of the enemy. The triumph of Achilles was not of long duration. Intoxicated with success, he attempted, at the head of the Greek army, to storm the city of Troy, when Paris, by the aid of Phoebus Apollo, aimed a well-directed dart at the hero, which pierced his vulnerable heel, and he fell to the ground fatally wounded before the Achaean gate. But though face to face with death, the intrepid hero, raising himself from the ground, still performed prodigies of valour, and not until his tottering limbs refused their office was the enemy aware that the wound was mortal. By the combined efforts of Ajax and Odysseus, the body of Achilles was wrested from the enemy after a long and terrible fight, and conveyed to the Greek camp. Weeping bitterly over the untimely fate of her gallant son, Thetis came to embrace him for the last time, and mingled her regrets and lamentations with those of the whole Greek army. The funeral pyre was then lighted, and the voices of the Muses were heard chanting his funeral dirge. When, according to the custom of the ancients, the body had been burned on the pyre, the bones of the hero were collected, enclosed in a golden urn, and deposited beside the remains of his beloved friend Patroclus. In the funeral games celebrated in honour of the fallen hero, the property of her son was offered by Thetis as the prize of victory, but it was unanimously agreed that the beautiful suit of armour made by Hephaestus should be awarded to him who had contributed the most to the rescue of the body from the hands of the enemy. Popular opinion unanimously decided in favour of Odysseus, which verdict was confirmed by the Trojan prisoners who were present at the engagement. Unable to endure the slight, the unfortunate Ajax lost his reason, and in this condition put an end to his existence. Final measures. Thus were the Greeks deprived at one and the same time of their bravest and most powerful leader, and of him also who approached the nearest to his distinction. For a time operations were at a standstill, until Odysseus at length contrived by means of a cleverly arranged ambush to capture Helenus, the son of Priam. Like his sister Cassandra, Helenus possessed the gift of prophecy, and the unfortunate youth was now coerced by Odysseus into using his gift against the welfare of his native city. The Greeks learned from the Trojan prince that three conditions were indispensable to the conquest of Troy. In the first place, the son of Achilles must fight in their ranks. Secondly, the arrows of Heracles must be used against the enemy. And thirdly, they must obtain possession of the wooden image of Pallas Athene, the famous Palladium of Troy. The first condition was easily fulfilled. Ever ready to serve the interests of the community, Odysseus repaired to the island of Scyros, where he found Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles. Having succeeded in arousing the ambition of the fiery youth, he generously resigned to him the magnificent armour of his father, and then conveyed him to the Greek camp, where he immediately distinguished himself in single combat with Eurypylus, the son of Telephus, who had come to the aid of the Trojans. To procure the poison-dipped arrows of Heracles was a matter of greater difficulty. They were still in the possession of the much aggrieved Philoctetes,